There's now been almost 2 weeks worth of demonstrations, and now there's calls for the complete abolishment of the police force. Is that even feasible? What is it going to be substituted with? Let's find out more with this new episode of Real with O'Neal. Welcome back.
It's real.
Why does everything always have to be about race? Well, historically speaking, it's always been about race, specifically the militarization of the police. I know that we're talking about now the police budgets that are overblown and the police unions that are not being held accountable and things like that. And I really wanted to dig in and look at exactly when the exponential increase of police budgets even occurred. And that was in the 80s. And 80s coming from the bills and the policies that were passed in Congress and signed into law by the presidents of the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, and of course into the 90s. And I want to start off with 1968. What's so crazy about 1968? Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. What did that do? It increased the budget of the FBI by 10% and increased the budgets of the police forces all across the country and allowed the purchase of military equipment and military weapons for all police forces. It allowed them to now have riot gear, tear gas, rubber bullets, things like that. Even established the SWAT teams during the time, which is interesting, which of course it's a result of the urban riots, kind of like what's going on right now. When the assassination and murder of Martin Luther King, there was riots across the country. And then LBJ, and then Nixon in 1971 got scared of these insurrections, got scared of these racial divides, that they knew that they needed to do something to quell these uprisings, quote unquote, and these riots coming from the black and brown community. And like I said, after the 1968 Omnibus bill and then going into Nixon's election, he, as we all know, the war on drugs in 1971. What did that do? Mass incarceration. What did that do? Minimum sentencing. It destroyed and completely destabilized the black and brown community. But at the same time, what did it do? It increased the budgets for the police yet again. And now we have a police force that's operating like a military. And I'll be honest, from people that are in the black and brown community that live in these communities, whenever you see police that are strapped up, suited and booted like they're in war, like they're in Afghanistan, you feel some type of way. And then it dissolves the trust in the community. And let's be honest, depending on what you believe and what history tells, a lot of the Southern police forces are actually direct descendants, from slave patrols during the plantations and the Civil War and when freed slaves and things like that. And they were just reconstructed into the police forces in the South. Now, it was a little bit different in the North. It was, of course, there was no slaves in the North, so the police force came from actually in Boston. But in the South, they definitely came from slave patrols. So there was already distrust within the communities of black and brown people and the police. So, like I stated, with Nixon and the war on drugs, and it increased exponentially the budgets of the police all across the country, it showed that the police are now more of a military force, law and order, than protect and serve. And just to show that systematic racism actually exists, that we all should already know by now, that Black Lives Matter knows by now, that unfortunately a lot of congressmen and congresswomen are trying to not really pinpoint and not really talk about. This is what I'm talking about with systematic racism. Check this out. If you haven't already seen this, I know this has kind of made its rounds around in Twitter and Facebook, things like that. But for those who don't know about this, check this out. It's going to piss you off. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? Quoted, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black people, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing them both heavily, we can disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Of course we did. And that's what I mean about systemic racism still having a lingering effect on the black and brown community that's destabilizes communities for decades. But let's reel it back in real quick. Let's look at the argument between the abolishment of the police, disbanding the police, versus defunding the police. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to entertain the argument that we should disband the police. I think that's the dumbest idea that I've ever heard. In fact, if y'all have a better, if you guys have any kind of articles, or if you have some sort of argument that you can, try to reply or rebuttal what I'm saying right now, please put it in the comments. I would love to see and hear what you guys have to say. But personally, I don't think it makes much sense. However, defunding the police is a little bit more interesting. Looking at how big of these budgets have become, specifically coming from racist policies, it makes me think that we probably don't need to have such a militarized police force, specifically because it was the purpose of them were quelling racial protests, which is happening now. But it's not helping with the tensions between these communities. I work at a mental health clinic, guys. And a lot of the role of the police is, of course, to protect and serve, exactly what their motto states. But it's now becoming such a huge, broad responsibility that a lot of the situations that we put police officers in, it doesn't make any sense. They don't have a lot of specialized training for them. So why is it that not all police precincts have social workers from a third party or actually hired within the police department that can go with the police officers to deal with these situations? If it's domestic, mental health, homelessness, poverty, things like that, we had to have specialized training, not only for our police force, but let's bring in some LPCs. Let's bring in some therapists and counselors that know, and crisis assessment people that know how to handle these situations better than a police officer. And so whenever we're getting, police officers in these situations, they don't know what to do, but they know they got a gun on their hip. They know that they can defend themselves. They know that they can violently try to bring this person down when that might not be the answer. The answer might be that they need a counselor. They might need some sort of social program. And that's why I believe that a lot of the budgets that's coming into the police force needs to not necessarily go to tear gas, but go to social policies and social programs that can help the community and heal that tension between the police and the people that live in the community. And I mean, check this out. The LAPD has a 2020 budget of $1.7 billion, according to the report, that accounts for over a quarter of their general fund. That's higher in Chicago at 37%, with a total budget approximating $1.68 billion. Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered, 2017 data shows that their police budget accounted for 35.8% of the general fund, totaling at $163 million. So let's say this, let's not defund the police. Let's reallocate resources that's already accessible to police departments and funnel them into programs that we know are effective in helping the community and mitigating crime and poverty. I mean, I'll be honest, even in the Dallas ambush in 2016, our own former Dallas police chief even stated that the responsibilities for police officers have been stretched to its limits and that they need help. These resources need to not, like I said, go to rubber bullets, but go to social workers. This is what he stated. Every societal failure, we put it off for the cops to solve. Schools fail, give it to the cops. 70% of the African American community is being raised by single women. Let's give it to the cops to solve that as well. That's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all those problems. And he's absolutely right. The police are ill-equipped to face these societal issues with an overinflated police budget. It's not going to the right thing. It's going to rubber bullets and not social programs. We need to have backup for our police. And so, like I said, it's not necessarily a defunding of the police, but a reallocation of their resources. And so what do we do next? Black Lives Matter, I'm speaking to you directly. What do we do next? Rioting and demonstrating and protesting and now has gotten the ear of everyone in the world. We're on the main stage. What happens next? I said it in my past videos. What do we do? Is it registration and voting? Is it trying to pass police reform? What I really think we need to do, just to help, situations like the Sandra Bland's, like the Eric Garner's, like the Breonna Taylor's, like the George Floyd's, because everything I said up to this point is great and fine and dandy, but that wouldn't have helped them. So what do we do next? We got to hold these people accountable for their actions. I'm talking to the police unions. Hold them accountable. I honestly think we need to call for a mass investigation in judges and police and the police union and everything up to that point, because there's still remnants of the racist policies that were put into place in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that still affect the black and brown community. We're not addressing that. We just want to riot. And don't get me wrong, I'm now seeing it now. I'm seeing people now understanding that rioting and protesting, that's great. And now we need to take what's the next stage? What's the next tier? What's the next level? But at the same time, what's next? What do we do? Like I stated, accountability, vote, get registered, y'all. Fill out your damn census. We need to know the demographics of your community so we can allocate money into education and infrastructure within your community. If you don't do that, we don't know. So do that. Black Lives Matter needs to really focus on the generational wealth. Okay, listen, y'all. I can tell I'm a historian. I love history. I am a student of history. And never have I seen in the history of America, in history of Black history, that we've gotten the ear of everyone, of the public, of our representatives, of the international community, to the point where we have the most leverage that we've had since the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 when that was passed. Never before. We need to use this time and this energy to make sure that we get exactly what we need to help our community. Generational wealth. Making sure that police reform happens. Getting the right representatives in that actually represents our interests and our problems. That's what happens next. Thanks for listening, y'all. Man, a lot of cool things about to come up, man. I don't want to spill the beans or nothing, but like, share, comment, subscribe on everything. Like I said, I'm on all my platforms. Real with O'Neal is my tag. You can find me on all social media. This is Real with Neil, y'all. I'll catch you later.
It's real.